Hello, 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 and welcome to Pop Culture Therapy. I'm Cruellica Kain.
Hello, everybody. It's Advent Nebula. Been a while.
I was going to say, he exists again.
Yeah, I actually do exist.
Oh, God, I thought...
Not just in the figments of people's imaginations.
I was going to say, I thought even though I've known you for so many years, I'm like, is he a figment of my imagination, or is he real?
You never know. You can will your own clones.
Yes, and we are essentially clones of each other half the time. The only difference is gender.
Yeah.
And you dropping your cell phone. So we're going to be talking about, we're going to be recording a number of different podcasts over the coming weeks. So you're going to hear some fun ones. You're going to hear some serious ones. You're going to hear some of them where we're just getting on a soapbox and bitching and moaning. And then you're going to be questioning your own sanity as you continue to listen to all of them.
If you don't already.
Exactly.
And with that, first one up, if you actually watched any of our stuff from Colorado Anime Fest, I ended up bringing this up in one of the panels because somebody ended up bringing up the question about what's your opinion on localization. I was like, okay, I've been wanting to do a podcast on this for a while, and it's just been escalating on social media. The localization of foreign properties, specifically Japanese media, with video games coming over, certain games getting remade. Controversy's been in anime since the late 80s. We all know this. But it just seems like now is where it's gotten to a toxic point.
It has. And what we're talking about is localization versus censorship. So going on with the actual definitions, for localization is the process of making something local in character or local in national consciousness. So think about like when you bring over certain things to the US for dubbing, or
even when you're trying to put together a subtitle script. I don't care how many weebs out there think that it has to be a direct translation. That's not going to work now that anime and a lot of the video games are now appealing to a larger mass market. You have to localize a pun. You have to make a Japanese meme or a Japanese reference that is not going to be understood to a foreign country that is not a native Japanese speaker. You have to make it in that language match with something that's equivalent.
Exactly. And even if you are a weeb or an otaku or whatever you want to call yourself, in all honesty, all anime, even when it's subtitled, still does elements of localization.
Yeah, so, even your fan subbers that you praised back in the day in the torrent era, they did that. You're just being hypocrites when you end up spouting this stuff on social media.
Exactly. Now, when we come to censorship, that technically, the definition is a suppression and prohibition of any parts of media, books, films, news, etc., that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. So when you think of censorship, the one thing you have to keep in mind is censorship is in the eye of the government that you live within. And it's also in the eye of the beholder how you define it. Like, for example, let's take Australia. And if we have any viewers in Australia, I don't know the laws by heart. I just know basic details. I've heard through many, many years and various grapevines of people who've lived in Australia that there are a lot of things that are censored over there versus what may be censored in the US, in England, or even in Japan, where anime doesn't just come from Japan anymore, but the generalities. And they censor things that they feel are overly obscene.
They have a ratings board that hasn't let Mortal Kombat come over since 2009's reboot.
And in all honesty, until probably about 5 years ago, the F word was not allowed on television in the United States. We've loosened the
standards and practices, basically, as long as it's not an analog broadcast network or a cable network that is catered towards a group under 15, you can have it on TV now.
As long as it's past a certain time. And then if you look at England, you can have tits everywhere on a television.
England, you can have hardcore porn between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m.
And in Japan, the other thing that you have to remember is, yes, they had some quote-unquote carte blanche years and years ago of what they can show. They have been censoring themselves for the last 10 years as well.
Yeah, they'll censor it for broadcast and then it'll get released uncensored on TV, but that's starting to not happen anymore. Basically, now they're starting to just go, okay, TV broadcast is going to be our international broadcast, and that's going to be the release that's even going to go on home video now. You can say what you want about your ecchi series. Japan's becoming more conservative. I hate to tell you guys that end up going that Japan's a holy land. No, they're becoming a lot more conservative as they get more into the world sphere when it comes to their media.
Well, and that's exactly it. Well, one example I have of censorship for Japan is the series Gantz. They never showed the final episode of that series on television. The rest of the series was shown.
And it was shown on late night cable TV that was a paid TV network.
Mm-hmm. But they did not show the last episode because of how hardcore it was. And if you don't know what Gantz is, it's basically like a hardcore creature feature sci-fi horror-ish anime.
Yeah, and then the last episode didn't get a broadcast because at the time, the Iraq War was going on and it was bringing up that topic. So it didn't air on TV at all because they didn't want the controversy, because at that time they knew Western fan subs were going on.
So the reason why we're bringing this up is twofold. Anime fans like Advent alluded to before have been talking for decades about localization
and that they pretty much equate localization to censorship, which it's not.
It's not. Localization just helps an audience understand the context of a joke, understand the context of a character. When I think localization could go too far is when you're translating first year, second year, third year in the high school, which is Japan, to freshman, sophomore, and junior, which is not equitable. If you think of a first year of high school in Japan, it's actually a sophomore in our American standard. But they don't do that any longer. They did once upon a time because they didn't understand. Well, actually, fans, truthfully, back in the 90s, we didn't understand. Where I grew up, we didn't have junior highs. You did growing up.
Yeah.
You had an elementary school, a middle school, a junior high, and a high school. We had elementary and high school. And some of our elementary grades mixed in with the high school grades for depending on the school you went to, where I lived in Buffalo, New York. So when I watched or read about a series about a character in middle school, I had to look up what that meant because I did not get it. Same thing for junior high. And so sometimes they have to make those equations to help an audience. And the one fear I have is more people fighting about localization. You're going to start gatekeeping
if you haven't already been doing it. And then there's bad localization that still happens. Nintendo is still notorious for this. They will try to westernize a lot of stuff. They'll re-edit the scripts because anything they deem too controversial under Treehouse. Just look at the more recent Fire Emblem games, especially with Engage. That script, and then it ended up being completely different from the actual meanings. I've looked up a lot of it, actually have conversed with some people that actually know Japanese and said that no, the English script is a botched joke. Some of those people actually got together to create a mod to put online. Nintendo keeps taking it down because they're going, no, we don't want this out here.
And the other challenge with localization is it's not like a lot of people, when they do make the comment about localization, they will say that the American anime studios are the ones responsible for this. That Funimation, Genin, ADV, and I know I'm naming some very outdated studios, but people would complain that they're the ones at fault. But
there's a real good example going back on some of the old ADV DVD commentaries. They would email back and forth to Japan before they'd put together their scripts on their old DVDs or VHS tapes back in the day to get script approvals for what they were doing back in the day. So that shows that they were involved. Nowadays, because it's so condensed together, a lot of these scripts are being put together within 2 to 3 days with translation. So you gotta understand that there's still gotta be an approval somewhere on this. Unless it's like they're not really caring about the show because they're like, well, we're just gonna force this out. For the most part though, Japan, what the studio's working for now, like with Crunchyroll, High Dive, Netflix, they're pretty hands-on anymore with their international market on how they want to market their series anymore. And Capcom, you can look at them with the RE4 remake. A lot of people there are complaining about censorship because of Ashley's character. It's like, no, Capcom knows what's going to sell on a worldwide market, and what's acceptable now is not. It's gonna be not so much what was in 2004 acceptable. Ashley is now more covered up. You can't see up her skirt. I think that's a good thing because, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of misogynistic video game and anime fans out there.
Well, and that's the problem, is I understand where people are coming from. To be fair, I do appreciate where a lot of people are coming from on the argument of localization. I understand where a lot of people say, well, the Japanese version is the purest version. I appreciate where people are coming from that you lose something when you change the script to localize. I can appreciate where you're coming from because like you said, there are good examples of it and there are bad examples of it. But at the same time, one, by saying, and I hear this so many times from friends, from others that I've talked to throughout, that they will only watch the Japanese version because the Japanese version is the most purest example. They still localize the scripts for the Japanese version. Yes, they would make it as clear as possible, but if you want a great example of what you get when you don't localize, when you go true to fact, this is what they said in Japanese. Read the Kuga manga,
which they had Google AI translate, do the translation from straight Japanese to English. It doesn't work.
Yes, and yes, people who know Japanese may have a different perspective, but the challenge is you have three things go on. You either have Google AI or you have a machine translate to give you direct translations. Two, you have a person who knows English, who is fluent, like expertly fluent in both languages. And I have seen it. Gilgamesh is a great example. If it's a great anime, but a lot of the scripting was done where it was almost true to accurate text, and you're like, you have to watch the Japanese version because the American is so boring because they're doing exactly what you wanted. They're not localizing. And you don't connect with it.
And that's one of the few times where everybody knows the old Stephen Foster jokes about ADV and how he'd go off kilter with his scripts. It is one of the few times where he was forced to actually do a direct translation of the script.
And you also have to think, when translating to another culture or to another country, like Japanese to English, based on the accuracy,
Yeah, and
you're limited.
I don't think a lot of people that, unless they're actually fluent in Japanese, understand how the phonetics of the Japanese language works. Every sentence spoken in Japanese ends in a verb. It's one of the few languages that does that.
Mm-hmm.
So context in the sentence when you do a direct translation, when you're directly translating in English, especially with a machine translation, it reads just, huh? What's that supposed to come across?
Well, think about it. Donde desu ka? Where is this? That's exactly how we translate it, but how you translate it, if you actually go word for word, donde, where? Des, this, essentially. Ka is, where this is. Do you think that makes, or oname wa, name is. We would translate to what is your name? So you have to always remember that different languages, it's just like translating Spanish into English. Spanish is a language where you do, because we do subject predicate.
Yes.
In Spanish, for example, they do predicate subject. In Japan, they do a combination of Spanish with the predicate subject. And then they do have the verb. So it goes predicate, subject, verb. And then they also don't have a word for they. Like if you want to say they are doing it, you would say adventachi.
Yeah,
because that means Advent and others.
They're literally going to be looking at it from the perspective of that person did it or that group did it. They don't have a specific, unless it's actually referring to a specific gender with a hierarchy in the family.
Exactly. Where in English, we have a lot of options. We don't just donate or denote she or he. We have she, he, it. I know it sounds terrible, but
that's why there's they and them. We have as well.
And that's why they, them was included. We have so many different ways of identifying people.
Yeah, and it even gets more complex if you're looking at a language like German, which has even more ways to dictate how a person is referred to.
So localization is a slippery slope because at the end of the day, companies gotta make money.
And they're going to appeal to the most mass market that they can.
And if you want to think about it this way, anime fans, it's all of our faults that anime is mainstream now, because we kept on pushing and pushing and pushing to have anime on our televisions, to have anime available anytime we want, on digital, on physical media, in movie theaters now. So you, not you specifically on the other side, but you as a group, or even all of us, we're guilty of asking for more, asking Japan and Korea now, and China, and so many other Asian countries that are producing anime. Anime is not just Japan anymore.
Yeah, it's gone international. And then on the flip side of it, mobile games, because of the App Store and its guidelines, and because of China and its guidelines, some of your sexy costumes have to be censored if they want a worldwide market now. I'm sorry, folks.
Exactly. And censorship, when we look at like RE4 for Ashley, censorship, yes, there are countries that do censorship. The United States is guilty of it as well in certain themes. You have to be very thankful for the fact that they have loosened their censorship rules in the United States, because back in the 80s and 90s, you were very strict. Like,
Any kind of Christian religious depiction had to be censored. Couldn't even be shown.
Like Will and Grace was very muted for a show about a gay man.
Yeah. Frasier was very muted for having Niles being a gay allegory.
Because he was in real life.
Yeah.
And he couldn't be outed. Sheldon in Big Bang Theory. It's so depressing. Like, okay, I love the character. I love how they did the story of his relationship. But they didn't let the actor be who he wanted to be. And so censorship has been happening since the 50s and 60s. Even earlier than that.
Basically since the mid-40s when the Catholic Church ran the ratings board for television and movies in the U.S.
I've even been researching Japan because I learned a lot about how pre-Meiji Reformation, the idea of homosexuality versus heterosexuality was very fluid in Japan. Like, there were decades upon decades. It wasn't until they opened the borders and the Dutch, so blame the Dutch, blame my brother-in-law because he's Dutch, but the Dutch and many other Christian-focused nations, and China at the same time, brought in a lot of their Puritan-like ways.
Which were rebelled against when the emperor that ended up coming into the power right at the end of the 1920s that eventually led to World War II. He wanted to bring things back, and then when America came in and rebuilt Japan, a lot of the Puritan values were written into the Japanese Constitution by the Americans.
And so, well, it really started with the Meiji, but exactly that. So, not that you can blame Americans, well, you can blame Americans for many things where I'm pro-America, don't think I'm not a patriot, but at the same time, America sucks. But at the same time, Japan has become very, very heteronormative. More so than they were in the past. So that's why, like, fujoshis, who are individuals that enjoy yuri or yaoi fiction, that's why all of that yuri yaoi fiction is very underground. That's why they mock, until recently, thank God, they mock characters that are non-heteronormative. And so they've been censoring things for decades. And
or you'd have a comedian like Hard Gay who would be just that kind of comedian that was just a satire on the whole community.
And so in America, we have gone leaps and bounds to reduce censorship. And I think we've been fairly successful. Not as successful compared to Canada or most of Europe. But I feel like we have progressed a lot further than we have. And censorship is always going to be in the eye of the beholder. Now, I will say, compared to localization, everybody has an opinion on censorship. I read the Merriam-Webster definition. Do I think there's a lot of censorship in things that I have read, that I have watched, that I think they have pulled punches and censored themselves? Abso-fucking-lutely.
Oh, you know there has been over the course of the last few hundred years from even the fiction that we enjoy reading that has come over from Europe.
Absolutely. Like, books have been censored to the point where, unless you look, you would never know that the author of The Count of Monte Cristo, Three Musketeers, was a black man. You would never know.
Mary Shelley, what she was writing about, because they kind of kept her gender ambiguous, because back in the day, Mary could even refer to a male in the 17, 1800s.
And the initial first printing had her husband's name.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't release it under her name because they didn't think the book would sell. So there's censorship with that. 4 Kids is the perfect example of U.S. censorship. Think of Yu-Gi-Oh! Think of their original adaptation of One Piece, Cardcaptor Sakura.
Just think about their early run on Nintendo before the Nintendo company took over.
Nintendo, like you said, they're great for censoring. And when you think of censoring, it's not censoring content, it's also censoring access. Because that's the one thing that you have to think about. The fact that Persona, a series that is about very extreme things. It's about culture. It's about sexuality. It's about haves versus have-nots. The fact that they put Persona 5, as well as they did digital for the other Personas, on their system says a lot about them.
And I think that's only because Sega, their agreement with Sega nowadays. But
Absolutely.
when it comes to their own titles, they will still. That's why I never have played any of the Xenoblade games. I wanted to get a Switch, but when I found out just how badly localized all three of the Xenoblade games were, including changing names of characters and ended up rewriting the scripts so they weren't near as sexualized, I'm like, that's not the original vision.
The only thing I will give Nintendo credit for is I play Otome games. I don't know why, after being with my husband for 22 years, I still love dating sims. I find them fucking hilarious.
It's because they're outrageous.
They are. They're extremely outrageous. But Nintendo, with their Switch, is the go-to place to get all of them.
Yeah, all they do is just take Steam port and just put it right on the Switch.
And they don't change anything. They don't censor anything. Not that Otome games are typically lewd, because Japanese proclivities are not that, compared to America, they're not that lewd. When you're seeing a Japanese anime that's lewd, you're like, how repressed are you? Because they go overboard. If I saw a woman with the jugs that half those women have, I'd be like, you have back pains. I already have back pains with myself.
And yet you look at my figure collection and comment on it all the time.
God, I worry about your figures. I figure they're going to have to walk with a cane soon. Maybe I'll buy mini canes for all of your figures. But, so, localization, you can't get away from. That's the moral of the story. It's always going to happen. If you want an accurate adaptation that's perfectly, like, word for word of what they're saying in Japanese, exactly how they say it, ask fan subbers for it. There's a lot of shitty ass fan subbers that will do it. And I don't mean that in a negative manner, but there are out there. But if you want something that you can read and enjoy because it grammatically makes sense to your US or any location you go to, generally they're written by most Americans, so they have the U.S. grammatical focus, which is the same for any English-speaking country.
Except I've read some British translations of manga, and my dear God, do I laugh at the slang in those.
Well, do you want a fag?
Yeah.
Enough said. But anytime it's translated into English, you're going to get that. Now, you could say, well, what if I find it in another country? What if I find like a Chinese or a Italian translation?
The Chinese translations are probably going to be even more localized because of the country's standards and practices.
And then for Italy, yes, Italy is very open on what they do. But you have to remember, if you translate that Italian translation into English, it's like playing the game of telephone. It's going to change all the way down the line.
There's been notorious old manga scanlations where they went from Japanese to Chinese to English.
Yes, I've read those. They're horrendous. But censorship, if you feel something is censored, do ask yourself two questions. One, is it censored in my way of thinking? If it's censored in your way of thinking, then go to the second question. Is it censored that prohibits anyone from enjoying it? If it's censored to the point where no one can enjoy it because it takes away all of the enjoyment. I'm going to use Yu-Gi-Oh here because I understand there's people who like it, but Yu-Gi-Oh is bastardized from the original.
Even the card game still to this day is bastardized.
Absolutely. I will fall on a sword and agree with anyone for that particular series. Same thing with Cardcaptor Sakura in America. It was bastardized and censored horribly.
Yeah, it wasn't until we got this dub from the Philippines, that terrible English dub from the Philippines, we actually got the original version.
But unless you watch it in Japanese, the American version of Cardcaptor Sakura changes the entire story.
Yeah.
To the point where there's no coming back.
And then back in the day with Sailor Moon, Uranus and Neptune are cousins.
Oh,
kissing
God.
cousins.
I hated that. I remember seeing that on television, like, yeah, even I, back in the 90s, knew that was false. But, so, you can see when something is truly censored where no one would have enjoyment over it. But if you're just bitching, bitch. I'm not going to stop anybody from complaining because that's your right. But make sure not to do this. Do not attack the creators. Do not attack the company. Do not attack the voice actors. Do not attack the directors because they're all doing their job. You may not like the job that they did. Now, if it's a bad story or a bad movie, sure, complain about it. But don't attack people for doing their jobs.
Yes. Now, on the flip side, you can go off on social media on the couple of the translators that have admitted online that they have written the story for their agenda because they didn't agree with the original creator's stories, which we have had.
Yes, okay, that's fine. I will put that caveat out there. Obviously, don't say you need to go die because that's just...
But you can criticize them for literally not respecting the source material. You can criticize them for that.
And if you criticize anyone, even if you do criticize somebody for doing their job, do it in a constructive manner. And please, for the love of God, any Brony fans, do not say rewrite the ending. Or say you should have done A, B, C, and D. Only because, one, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood was not cheap to redo. That was something that was a super bonus. And yes, we're getting it occasionally, but that doesn't mean that every company is going to be able to redo their property.
Yeah, it's just like with the, it's not Bones that's doing it. It looks like it's going to be A1 Pictures and Sony with the reboot of Soul Eater now coming out. Because with that, because of the popularity of Fire Force and the two series being tied together, they kind of have no choice now.
Yes, but they've been talking about that for decades. And if you say, I'm going to create a petition to have this redone, good on you.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
Look how well it worked for all you Vic fans out there. He's still, he's having to do middle school conventions now. Let's think about that.
I don't want him around middle schoolers, but...
Yeah. Nobody does.
To each their own. But I think we're done with our soapbox. Because we could continue on this soapbox forever.
Yeah. We could keep on going on this for a good hour on this one.
Absolutely. But at the end of the day, don't gatekeep people.
Yeah, that's all you're doing.
That's exactly all you're doing.
You're just trying to keep... And quit using the term normies.
Oh my God, yeah. I know!
It's not helping your case.
It's like saying, okay, boomer. You know, in all honesty, I say okay, boomer a lot. But...
We do it as a joke because we're that age group that's right on the cusp of millennial and Gen X.
Exactly. So, I use it as a joke. Like, I'll say okay, boomer to my parents because it makes us all laugh. But at the same time, it does not win an argument. It's like calling somebody a Karen. We can call everybody a Karen, but if you're trying to make an actual constructive argument, calling them a Karen while you do so diminishes everything you just said. So think about that as you go along. But with that said, we're going to have another podcast for you, and we're going to be more normal.
Yeah.
As often as we can.